Everybody, thank you for being on time. It's great that you were here. A couple of people who weren't here last week. Still expecting quite a few more to arrive, which I'll bring in through the back so they won't disturb too much. Next week it's not on, so we've got a break this week because of another event that we have on here, and then 4 weeks after that. So great to see you.
Thank you.
Good luck. Good luck.
I originally thought this was going to be a group of 12 of us. And then after last week I thought we might get down to 12. But you're back. That's good. 5 minutes or less of review. Last time we did the ancients. And I wonder whether any of you detected a shift even in the ancients. I'll read you some quotes and you tell me if you detect a shift in emphasis. This is Socrates. True wisdom comes when each of us realise how little we understand about life, ourselves and the world around us. That's Socrates. He was famous for saying, the only true wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. Okay. Move to Plato, see if you hear a shift. Plato says, the first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself, and to be conquered by yourself is the most shameful and vile thing. He says to love rightly is to love what is orderly and beautiful in an educated and disciplined way. That's Plato. He says knowledge is true opinion. He says I've never known a mathematician who is capable of reasoning. Oh dear. There's a shift there, but just hold it. Here's Aristotle. The roots of education are bitter, but the fruit is sweet. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Those who educate children are more to be honoured than those who produce them. For these only give them life, but they, the art of living well. Do you detect a shift? Socrates kept saying all the time, my greatest gift to the world is that I know nothing. By the time we get to Aristotle, he was over here somewhere. That doesn't work very well, does it? Remember Aristotle talking about the soul as reason, spirit and appetite? What's the highest part of the soul? Reason. And you hear the shift. And to begin with, philosophy is about wisdom.
It's applied.
Sorry?
It's applied.
Yet certainly it does move towards being applied, but there's a shift from wisdom to knowledge. They're not the same thing. Now I'm scared to walk past that. Okay. We've only got 1,000 years to cover, is that cool? Easy peasy. Easy peasy. Last week, when I showed you this board, there was nothing much between Augustine and Aquinas and then Luther. But I didn't want to give you the impression that nothing happened in the world. So let's think for a little bit about the context in which these medievals come. Firstly, and I hardly know how to tell you this, But in the time of Augustine, and I promise you Augustine absolutely dominated for 1,000 years. You couldn't be alive in the Western world and not be influenced by Augustine. Augustine wrote in the middle of the fall of Rome. And the fall of Rome is the most momentous thing. Once Rome fell, there were no more tricky buildings, there was no more trick architecture, there weren't any more aqueducts, and what began was a period of weak states and strong landowners, of barons. This was a massive moment in history. Also think for a minute, Constantine had this battle, do you remember? And he converted to Christianity because his mum was Christian, and he won the battle. Blow me down if this Christian God doesn't help you win battles. So he made this Christian religion legal. It was a Jewish sect. It was underground, literally, in Rome, literally underground. Because people were afraid they were being picked on, they were being bullied, they were being fed to the lions. That's always not good from a WHS point of view. And within a couple of years of that, this underground sect was made compulsory throughout the whole Roman Empire. Can you just imagine that for a second? So, in 9 years here, we've moved from 2 full-time staff to 37, I think, in 9 years. That's been pretty momentous. That's about as big a change as I think I can kind of cope with in 9 years. These characters in the space of 9 or 10 years moved from being an underground sect to the worldwide religion. Try and get your head around what that meant. And Augustine wrote in the middle of that. What would be some of the issues that these characters would be facing? Think about it. What would be a key kind of issue?
Communication.
Yeah. What else?
Compromise with the world. Compromise.
Yeah, how to live in the world.
Yeah.
What else?
Education.
Yeah.
Confidence.
Yeah.
Power.
Yep.
Confusion.
Yeah. How about authority? Authority. So suddenly someone puts you, you're in charge of a little group that's meeting in your garage, and within years it's worldwide. It's worldwide. How do we know who's in charge? And how do we know that the bishop over there who believes funny shit is more right than me? Serious issues here. So, and while that's going on, the Roman Empire, which made us worldwide, is collapsing. Can you put those two things together? Suddenly we're a worldwide power, and the worldwide power is collapsing before your eyes. Some people say that, but I doubt it.
New empire.
Yes, actually. Yes. But when the Roman Empire goes away, the only empire left is the Church Empire. But in this moment of transition, it's the most incredibly difficult. It's almost too hard to get your head around. And there have been libraries of books written about why this happened, why did the Roman Empire fall? You spend the rest of your life reading about that. There is one theory about the church actually undermined the empire. I don't know that there's a lot in that. But one of the early creeds of the Christians was that Jesus is Lord. You'd be familiar with that. Now, in the Roman Empire, the creed you said every day was Caesar is Lord. So this was a direct challenge to the authority of Caesar. I think you can say it didn't help. But I don't think it's fair to say that it brought down the Roman Empire. I just don't think that's true. It's just one of the many factors. I think what really happened is there was corruption on a major scale, and as German tribes became stronger and started to pick up bits of territory, those territories were lost for taxation purposes, and the less tax you raise, the more you lose power and so on. And some of these marauding tribes decided that they wanted to be Roman kind of thing, but so they'd get into the Roman army and then they'd divide. The loyalty inside the army was kind of compromised now. We didn't know if we're German or we're Roman. And so it's complex, and I don't want to worry you too much about it. But what I do want you to note is it is the most, we think we live in changing times. This was the most unbelievable moment in history, and here's Augustine trying to stitch together some kind of theology that will hold the world together. And he writes like he's living at the end of the world. Augustine is a depressive writer. And in a way, he is living in the end of the world. It's the only way to understand his rather depressing view of life. And that depressing view of life dominated. I don't know whether to keep going with history or with Augustine. Let's just talk about Augustine a bit more. You'll find right up until we get up to the wars, so this weekend, next week, every philosopher that crops up, in a way, is looking for certainty. They're all looking for authority. What happens is everybody works out that the previous generation did it right, and there's a new and more reliable access to authority. Augustine says the authority for the future rests in Scripture and in the Church. So in Scripture and tradition together. He says, if I wouldn't believe Scripture except that the Church demands that I do. It's funny, if you've been brought up a fundamentalist, people who say the Bible only. My question to you is, how do you know that's the Bible? The only answer is tradition. Excuse me if you're not religious, but this 1,000 years, you've just got no choice. You've just got to be religious. because the only worldwide power, when we talk about the Roman Empire, is the Church. So the demise of Rome is a messy, messy, messy piece of history. Let me see if I want to say anything about it. Augustine wrote opposing skepticism. He was in his day as the empire. Better turn the phone off. As the empire was falling, the most popular philosophy was skepticism. There really is no truth, and no matter what argument you've got, I have an opposing one. So your argument and my argument are as good as each other. So in the end, you can't know truth. There's a little bit of that around, actually. As a society loses its foundation, that's not uncommon. So as the Roman society was losing its way, Augustine wanted to overcome that. And so something that we'll hear more about, do you remember me using the word epistemology? That's the study of how do you know what you know. When we get into moderns, we'll have discussions about how do you know if the table's still there when you leave the room. How do you know if you're wrong if you're not married? It's just a joke. So that's where we'll go in the long run, but for the minute. So Augustine said that you know truth by inner illumination. Interesting.
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yeah.
With that, not knowing truth and everyone having their own truth. That's very similar to postmodernism.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it really is. And in some ways, this period of history wasn't unlike ours. Everything's crumbling. Now, postmodernism, which we will spend a whole week on, one of the benefits of doing this course, and I'm not sure that there's many, but one of the benefits is that by the time we're talking about postmodernism, which is the atmosphere in which we live, you will understand where that came from. That didn't just get born out of the blue, it reacts to what came before it. And if you can begin to understand the world we're living in, then I think there'll be value in that. Certainly we are living in a postmodern age now, and most PhDs today are about deconstructing something. But we'll get there. That's 2 more sessions. Yet. Let's just belt through history a little. I've mentioned Boethius because I won't spend much time on him, but he was significant. I think his greatest contribution, let's limit it to this, his greatest contribution was in his philosophy. He defined evil as the absence of good. Now, I don't know if that sounds very profound to you, but in our age, evil, if we had to sit down and talk about this, we'd probably come up with a Star Wars theory, where you have the Lord of Darkness and the God, I guess, or goodness and evil, and we tend to see those as equal and opposite forces. Boethius' fabulous contribution, I reckon, is that he said, there is only good. That's all there is. There's just good, and there's absence of good. So in a way, he says evil doesn't exist, but it's real. Yeah. So an evil person is a person who lacks humanity, and that's all it is. It's just a lack. It's like a shadow is a real thing. We name it, but it's just the absence of light. But we give it a name, and we think everything we give a name to must have an active presence. But Boethius says that's just an absence. That's a good contribution.
It allows that sense that there's goodness in everyone, and
that's
our,
right.
our search for it, or our allowing
Yeah.
to be there in relationship.
Yeah, and it really takes the fear out of evil, because you don't have to fear what's evil, because all evil is the absence of something.
But it also sounds like he's saying that there is evil and good is superimposed on top of it.
No, that's not what he's saying at all.
Only if there is, yeah, well, that's what it sounds like.
No. He's saying evil is a real nothing. So it's not there. There's nothing to fear because it's not there. It's just an absence. All there is good. There is nothing other than good, because what isn't good is nothing. You get it? So it's not two forces doing battle with each other. It's simply good or absence of.
So where's the idea of degrees of good come from?
Thomas gives us that, so we'll get there tonight. Is that all right? We'll get there. You want to do a little bit of history? Let's screen through a little bit of history, because this wasn't blank. There was actually a lot happened in the medieval period. Muhammad was born in 570, and by the time he died, all of Arabia was Muslim. That's pretty remarkable. Gregory the Great, 590, was one of those popes, and you know the Bishop of Rome wasn't a pope. That was a shit fight that happened in due course. But the fight had been sort of semi-settled. That's not even true, is it? I'll tell you in a minute. Nothing's absolute, you know. I believe in absolute truth. I just don't think we can know it absolutely. Gregory the Great was a missionary pope. He really pushed the boundaries of Christendom. So Rome's pretty much gone away. Gregory the Great's pushing the Christian church all around the place. In 597, Augustine, who comes from North Africa, went to England. English history is interesting, but it's such a mishmash. You know, the Vikings came and pushed the Celts off to one side, and then the Picts came and pushed the Celts off. In fact, I think Welsh is a Viking word that means slave. Isn't it interesting? I reckon in England it's so amazing that you can take 3 steps that way and the accent's completely different and distinctive. And that's because their history is so complicated. It's just one war after another. But anyway, so the Saxons came, and there was a Celtic church in England already. They've been there for a long time. But this Pope Gregory saw some Saxon kids in Rome who were slaves and took pity on them, and he sent Augustine and 40 other friars to Kent, which was a separate kingdom. That's another whole business. To evangelise the Saxons who had belted the Celtics. So it was a big ask. They went to Canterbury and settled there, and Augustine spent the rest of his life there. And I think one Christmas day they baptised 10,000 people, but that's because they did convert the king. That had something to do with it. I think that was Ethelbert or somebody. The Arabs seized Constantinople in 674. Back here with Constantine, as the Roman Empire was getting weaker, he divided the kingdom into 2, east and west. So there was Rome and there was Constantinople. I can't say that. Istanbul. And so that was an equally important place as Rome for the centre of Christianity and from the Roman Empire. So you had an Eastern Empire and a Western Empire now. And so the church also divided East and West. Now, most church historians will tell you East and West church divided over an argument about Easter, the dating of Easter. And, you know, that was one of the slight problems they had. But it was one of the minor problems. It turns out scholarship says the East was right and we're wrong. We're all celebrating Easter at the wrong date. And that's because Hebrew lunar months are so bloody hard to understand. Anyway, so we've got it wrong. Never mind. So really the reason for the difference in the East and West was that Rome itself went East and West. So the church went East and West. At one stage, the Pope of Rome excommunicated the Pope of Constantinople, and he returned the favour. Charlemagne, you heard him? Christianising what we would call Germany from France. And he had a huge form of evangelism. If the church ever wants to really grow, they've just got to copy this guy. They just killed everybody who didn't want baptism. Seems like a method. 866, the Vikings, their great army lands in England. Then they attack Paris. That lasts for some years. William the Conqueror, 1066 and all that. That's, you know, so now England is speaking French. Just to make life a tad more interesting. Aquinas comes in about there, and we'll move to him in a sec. Just just to give you an idea of how this church empire that was largely built by Augustine. Augustine invented the string that held it together. In 1077, King Henry IV, who was a German king, walked bare feet in the snow to the Pope in a place called Canossa or something like that, and asked for his forgiveness because they had a fight over who had the authority to appoint various officials in the church. And the Pope said that was his right, and the king said, well, I'll make these appointments in my kingdom. And King Henry lost the battle so monumentally that he walked bare feet to the Pope through snow and begged forgiveness. That's probably the high point of the power of the church over the state. And it's not important except it does help to explain when history starts racking up the other way, big time. All this stuff that we'll do in our next session happens for a reason, and it's hard for us to get our heads around just how monumental and total was the dominance of the church over every kingdom in the West. Okay. We have the Crusades, and the Crusades were a disaster. They were just horrible moment in history. It was violence on an unbelievable scale, and it was Christians with all the insights of Charlemagne really deciding they had to shape stuff for Jesus and kill whoever was in the way. However, that period of the Crusades led to an almost complete transformation in Western history, because we got into Muslim territory and found they were ahead of us in every way. They were more scholarly, they knew more about science, they had the ancient Greeks that we'd forgotten about. So Plato still lived through Augustine, but Aristotle was completely lost. And it's quite significant that the University of Oxford was established in the year 1117. And it's not unrelated at all to Aquinas and his influence. I'll tell you about that in a second. Saladin took back Jerusalem anyway, 1187. It's a very significant day. Am I killing it yet? I'll tell you a funny story. I'm dying to tell this. I'll probably put it in the inner circle tomorrow. I did a funeral the other day, and this woman who was at the funeral told me how she's very religious, and she drags her 6-year-old grandson to church, to Mass, every day, every Sunday. And the kid hates it. And he says every week, it's boring. And last Sunday he said, Grandma, this is so boring. And Grandma said, well, Jesus was crucified for us, and the least we can do is go to Mass every Sunday. And he said as quick as a wink, but Jesus was only crucified once.